Okay. Alright, so yesterday we went over igneous rocks. Today we're going to look at sedimentary rocks. It'll be very similar. We're going to talk about what makes them unique. And we will also have a few questions for you to answer to check your understanding. Okay, so go ahead and log in. Just again, a name, your actual name please, and no student ID is required.
I don't want to put my actual name. Name. What did you say? I was going to put name.
Okay, let me see if I've got everybody.
Mine comes up.
Got everybody, good. Alright, so we're going to talk about how we form, just like we talked about how we form igneous rocks, and it's from magma and lava cooling, how we form sedimentary rocks. And there's 5 steps to make a sedimentary rock. Okay, we have weathering, erosion, deposition, compaction, and lithification. And you'll need to have a good understanding of those 5 steps. Okay, weathering, erosion, deposition, compaction, and lithification. We're going to go through each of them. Okay, weathering, the first one. So we've got a mountainside. It's made of rock. The first thing that happens, it has to be weathered, which means it has to be broken apart. Okay, there's lots of things that can cause rocks to be weathered. That can be water raining on it. It can be gravity that pulls the rock down to the ground. It can be if it rains and that rain goes inside the cracks in the rocks, and then it gets cold and it freezes, it can break that rock apart. Plants, roots can break rocks apart. Wind, all of those things can do weathering. Okay, it's just the processes of breaking apart these rocks. Okay, and when we do this, we often get stuck of thinking of how humans might weather rocks, right? Bulldozers and things. That's not what we want to talk about. We're going to talk about natural ways that these are weathered. Okay? Not ways that we don't want to say things like dynamite or driving over rocks. We want to say things like wind or rain or snow or those types of things. Okay? If you think of weathering, this usually takes quite a bit of time. Okay? So first thing, we have to break our rocks apart. And then we have erosion. We might think that erosion is very similar to weathering. It's similar except for it's the transportation of those weathered pieces. Okay? So sometimes weathering and erosion happen together. So we might have a stream that's running through a mountain, and that stream breaks apart pieces of rock, but then it also transports those pieces of rock. Okay? So weathering is the breaking apart. Erosion is the transportation of those rocks to somewhere else. Okay, and probably the most common way that erosion happens is by water. But we also have things like gravity. Things might fall from the top of a mountain down it. We can also have wind. You ever been in a desert or sand when it's windy? It really hurts on your ankles. And that's because the wind is blowing the sand and it's eroding it, it's moving it. Okay? Snow, a lot of things can help in erosion. Okay, so we've taken this rock, we've broken it apart, and then we've moved it somewhere else. And now we're going to deposition, or we're going to deposit it somewhere else. So deposition is where we have moved the rock and then we stop moving it and it falls down. Okay, because sedimentary rocks have a lot of layers. So this picture right here, where we see a stream coming down, and then we've got all of this rock that's in this water down here. This is deposition. That's where it's been eroded and moved, and then it's deposited here. Okay? So, we've got weathering, we break it apart, erosion, we move it, deposition, we stop moving it, and it starts falling in layers. Okay? Next thing is we continue to put layers on it. More rocks get deposited on top of it, and it starts compacting it and squishing it together. Okay? Then our last step is lithification. Okay, it's a tough word, lithification. What that means is we're now cementing those rocks together. Okay? So this picture that you have on your screens, we've got all these little pieces of rocks, and then they get cemented together. And that's our lithification process. Okay, so I'm going to go over them all one more time real quick. Weathering, we have a rock, it's broken apart into pieces. Erosion is where we move it somewhere else. Deposition is where we stop moving it and it falls in layers. Compaction is where we put more and more layers on top of it and they get squished together. And then lithification is finally where it sticks together or cements together. Okay? Those are our 5 processes to make a sedimentary rock.
Mr. James, what is, I said it before, what is the cement?
So the question was, is what cements the pieces together? Usually it's some form of chemical reaction. Some cases we might have, salts inside of water that the water evaporates and the salts form crystals and that can stick things together. And generally it's the bonds, the chemical bonds that will form, make little crystals or to make those things that work there. Yeah, but don't think of the crystals like the crystals we thought of in igneous rocks. These are definitely not visible.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so you have a question. What is the difference between, it should be what's the difference between erosion and weathering? Because erosion and transportation are exactly the same, right? Okay, so what is the difference between erosion and transportation? Go ahead and answer that. Yep, answer that question. I'll change it for the next class to make sure I kind of get it right. But this is a good question. What is the difference between erosion and transportation? They are the same thing.
Can you just answer this?
Sure. Ryan, are you going to answer? Okay. Not showing an answer. Okay, so erosion and transportation are the same thing, right? Erosion is the movement of the rock pieces, whereas erosion and weathering are different in that the weathering is when we break it apart, and erosion is we move it. Sometimes weathering and erosion happen at the same time. Right? The stream's flowing through, it can break a rock apart and move it. Okay, we're going to go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, so we're going to talk about sediments or classed sizes. So we have sedimentary rocks. Sedimentary rocks are made of sediments. And sediments are pieces of rocks. Okay, and we can classify or identify sedimentary rocks based on the sizes of the pieces of rocks in them. So just like we talked about how we classify igneous rocks by the sizes of the crystals, sedimentary rocks we can classify them based on the sizes of the pieces of rocks in them. Okay, so we'll go through just the sizes. And again, these are called clasts, C-L-A-S-T. Okay, so this is a boulder. So anything bigger than 10 inches is considered a boulder. So anything bigger than about this, we would call a boulder. Okay, next we have gravel to cobbles. You've probably heard of cobblestone, and I know that you've heard of gravel. That's anything from 2.5 inches, which is about this big, up to 10 inches. Okay, so around 2.5 to 10 inches is gravel to cobbles. Okay, then we have gravel to a pebble. That's anywhere from that 2.5 inches down to 0.16 inches. So pretty small between your fingers up to about 2.5 inches. So we consider that from gravel to pebbles. Okay, I've got a question in the middle here for you though. Let's describe a natural process of how sediments can be transported. what's a natural process of how sediments, some of these things like boulders, clasts, all of those clast sizes, what's a way we could transport some of them? Because we've broken them apart and we got to move them somewhere. How could we transport them?
Yeah.
所以如果下雨之后，第二步移动呢，它天然的就会
Not carpet. Yeah, it's not carpet.
That does not make it tile. That isn't carpet either.
Okay, so if you just. if somebody
Okay,
just holds me
so
and
you
says-
answered the question already?
下雨怎么？
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Okay. All right, a few more people. About 40% of you. Kylie, oh, she just returned her name. Dreama, Newton, Kenna, me. Okay, so answer. Go ahead and answer that. And
下雨会问你，
Let's go. Thanks.
下雨，然后这个雨呢就会开始侵蚀这些石头，你就把它去带到。
What?
okay, let's look at some of these. Somebody said it can be transported by water during or after rain. That is good. Sediments can be transported by a stream next to them. Okay, here's one that's different than stream. A lot of us put water in some form, which is one of the most common ways things are moved, sediments are moved. But erosion, we could put the sediment into a river or stream and the sediment would eventually be moved. Also, if there was an earthquake, the sediments could move. That could be true. If you have an earthquake and something falls off a mountain, gravity's going to then pull it down the mountain. That's a great way. A rock slide, right? That's like a lot of rock is moved during a rock slide, which can happen during an earthquake.
土石流这段这个方法就是因为它真的
Good. This is a good one. It's got two that we haven't mentioned yet. Transported by gravity and by wind. Okay, so we got an idea of how those natural things work. I only saw one person that talked about an unnatural way. Okay, trucks aren't natural. Okay, so let's make sure that we're focusing on those natural ones. Okay, so we've talked about some of those sizes. We've talked about boulders, cobbles, pebbles, and gravel. And now we're kind of talking about even smaller pieces. Okay, this is where it gets so small that it's hard for us to visualize or for me to even show you differences in them. But later on, I'll pull out some different sizes, a size for each of these clasts, and you can look at those. Okay, so gravel or granule, and it tells us our sizes at 0.04 to 0.16 inches. And think of this like sand. If you think of sand, that's about the size of a granule, except for it's a little bit bigger than your, like beach sand. It's a little rougher sand because our next size is sand. Okay? So this is finer sand, 0.025 to 0.04 inches we would call sand. Okay? And an example of how we do this, an example of a sedimentary rock is sandstone. It's made up of clasts that are this size. Okay? And then we have 0.00015 to 0.0025, and we have mudstone and silkstone. So mudstone, think of like sugar, a little bit finer than sand. Think about it's about like sugar. And this last one, mud or clay, think of it like flour. The size of the granules in flour. It's gonna, if you had some dry stuff of this, it'd be about that powdery. Okay? Alright, so here's a question for you. What is lithification? We got all these class sizes, we've talked about how we can weather them, we erode them, we move them somewhere, they get deposited, we compact them, and now we're going to lithify them. What is lithification?
这个是把石头叠在一起，这个是把石头粘在一起。Liquefaction 是第几步？
Okay, still waiting for about 20% of you to respond.
对，它第五步要多少？
Anybody still hasn't responded? We got 7%, that looks about right. Okay, so let's take a look. Maybe, are you seeing anything? It's not sharing it. There we go. Okay, what is lithification? About 53% of you said it's the process of cementing rock pieces together. That's correct. Okay, 53% of you said it's the process of cementing them together. Lithification is that process where we've got all of those pieces, they've been compacted, and now we're going to glue them or cement them together. Yes, Liz?
How come yours is pink and ours is blue?
I don't know.
What does it matter?
Okay, so the process of layering rocks on top of each other, what would that be? That's our deposition and our compaction phase. Okay, we're either dropping them out, or our compaction phase is when we're putting layers of rocks on top of them. What is the process of breaking apart rocks? Okay.
Weathering.
Awesome. That is weathering. And the process of transporting pieces of rocks, Jules? Erosion. Great. Okay, so if you remember when we talked about igneous rocks, we said they were the best for using radiometric or absolute dating. And the sedimentary, we couldn't date sedimentary rocks. And now you kind of have a better idea because sedimentary rocks are pieces, could be pieces of a whole bunch of other rocks, right? So each little piece is going to be a different age. That's why they are problems. But we can use radiometric dating to help us out because we can sandwich it between other igneous rocks or metamorphic rocks. Okay, and what I mean by a sandwich, just like you have a piece of bread and another piece of bread with all of this stuff in between it, if you know that you put your bread down first and then put the other piece of bread on last, then you know that everything in between that had to have happened between when you put your two pieces of bread down, right? Okay, so if this down here is an igneous rock, and say this right here is an igneous rock, and we can figure out how old those are, then we know that all of these rocks are at least between those two ages, right? So let's say if this happened 500,000 years ago, and this happened 250,000 years ago, that means that these rocks are between 500,000 and 250,000 years old. Okay? So that's how we can still figure out how old sedimentary rocks are, is by using some of that sandwiching. Okay? And you'll be able to use that sandwiching in the project, as part of this project. Okay? So, here's a question for you. We cannot use radiometric dating to directly determine how old sedimentary rocks are, but how can it help?
Question real quick. Do they look for the sedimentary and do they look for the igneous in the sedimentary?
No, so we'll find it below it and above it.
So they're not in. 所以它不是在不是在上面或者下面，因为它是一层一层叠起来，每一层是它们自己的石。所以呢，火岩石还是火岩石，不是什么。它叠起来，对，这一层。
You're waiting on Ryan, Trey, Josiah, Hannah, Jules.
这是没有叠起来。 它们只是叠在一起，没有连在一起。所以呢，土地这样的思考，可是它没有到地，没有到地去。所以它能混散出东西。然后呢，它有之前已经形成的时候，它还是形成的。所以我们要找的是它上面和下面。中间的话呢，就是。
Okay, let's take a look at some
因为
answers.
我们可以找到火焰是在上面，找到下面，我们才能预测它中间是什么。
Okay, it can help because we can decide how old the rocks in between those dates are. So they're referring to that sandwich, which is good. It can tell us how long they have been there. That's a good idea as long as we're looking at the oldest rock and the newest rock. You know how long it's been there. You may not know exactly when it happened, but we have a range of years.
然后叠在一起，然后呢，能固定在一起之后，再叫上面去。所以事实上，你刚刚说它们一层一层，时间久了之后，如果它们真的结合在一起。
Okay, it can help by the sandwich knowledge. So if we know below and we know above, we can figure out how old it is. And we will practice this sandwiching as we go. Okay, so let's look at some examples of sedimentary rocks so you start getting an idea what they look like. As you can see here, this one's got chunks of rocks in it, surrounded by smaller pieces of rocks. This is what we call a conglomerate. And a conglomerate is a bunch of different sizes or a bunch of things stuck together. Right? You might call a fruitcake a conglomerate of ingredients. Okay? You take cherries and all kinds of fruit and batter and we stick it all together and things are all different sizes. Okay? So a conglomerate is a sedimentary rock that has a bunch of different sizes and chunks of rocks in it. Okay, this one is sandstone, and we can kind of see the sizes in here. We can see the little granules. So they would be the size that we set for class for sand, and that makes it sandstone. Silkstone. Silt is another size that was more fine grained. Silkstone, again, we can't see the granules in this as easily. And so that tells us that it's of those even smaller sizes. And this one is siltstone, made up of silt, so we call it siltstone. Okay, limestone. Limestone is actually made of small, the remains of small bacteria or small creatures. Okay.
So it's fossil.
It is also fossil. It has lots of fossils in it. So it's like the shells and all of the bodies of all of these old creatures that are now stuck together. So have you ever seen the White Cliffs of Dover?
I don't know what that
You watch a movie that's in England, they almost always have big, huge white cliffs right on the edge of the ocean. Those are all made of this type of stuff. They're all made, those whole cliffs are made of the old, fossilized, turned into rock bodies of small sea creatures. Okay? So if you get a chance, we'll look at the White Cliffs of Dover so you can see that. Okay, this is rock salt. So how this forms is you've got water with salt dissolved in it, and then as the water comes off, we build up these crystals, these rocks, and that's a sedimentary rock. Okay, this one is bituminous coal. Again, this is made up of mostly plant matter. That's old, it's compacted for a very, very long time, and we can, it's a sedimentary rock, and it becomes coal, which Wyoming happens to have, be the state in the United States that produces the most coal of any state. We make the most of it. Okay? We do. Yep, the largest, the second largest, and the fourth largest coal mines in the United States are all in Wyoming. The third largest is in West Virginia. Okay, chalk is another one that's made of biological things. It's made of other creatures. And coquina is also one. And in this picture, you can actually see little shells in that. Okay, so you can see those shells, and they're a little bit bigger than they are in limestone. or in coal or other things so you can actually see the chunks and the pieces of shits. Okay, and we'll look at these in person as well. Okay, last question for you is describe how sedimentary rocks are formed. Remember, there are 5 steps. That'll help you to see if you can remember all 5 steps. And this is your last question. Okay, and if you can, give me more than just the names of the 5 steps. If you can describe the 5 steps, that's even better. Come on, think of something, Patrick, and I can.
What's number 3?
What do we do?
Wait, I got this.
Have our rock.
Number 3 is.
What do we do with our rock? Think through it rather than looking it up. What is? Yeah, you have to think through it. That's when you'll remember it. Okay, what do we do with this rock? It's, we got our rock. What are we going to do to make it into another rock? Okay, before that, it's too big for us to move.
You break it down.
Okay, we got to break it apart, which is called. And then we move it, which is called. Then we have to stop moving.
Strategy.
Deposition.
Oh.
虽然中文它是清洗，对，但是天气的时候呢，它是把大石破坏的形
Okay, then what do we do with it?
erosion 它是更 deposition 它到的地方，然后是没有住之后呢，形成一层
Our cement.
一层一层之后呢，连起来。
Lift it.
那最大的 sedimentary rock 叫
LITHI. Dictation. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to show you a couple of these. Okay, let's look at this one. Okay, weathering, breaking apart, erosion, transporting, deposition, stop moving in layers, compaction, more layers and smash together, liquefaction, cementing rocks together. Awesome. Okay, weathering, erosion, deposition, compaction, and liquefaction. Okay, so let's make sure that deposition is deposition, like the word deposit. Okay, weathering, transporting, deposition, layering, compacting, and all this are the way to make rocks out of other rocks and fossils. Okay, so this one's got some tough words to spell, but we'll see those a lot and we'll get used to them. All right, that is it. That's all that we have. The rest of the class is yours.
What time do we get out?
20. There's plenty of time to get started.
We got 10 minutes.
Okay?
5 minutes.
So, Kylie, if you want to review that video.